Good morning. We are in Hemshech Tzadik Daled, page 163 at the bottom. Which is parallels Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 2, page 1158. And we're discussing, this is all an explanation within the third type of bittul, an oir. That oir is a manifestation that personifies bittul, the antithesis and diametric opposite of yesh. Yesh is about an existence that senses itself to the point that we feel that we are self-made and don't feel we have a cause, which is exactly the kavanah. That's tachtenim. If we felt that, it would essentially negate the entire purpose of Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyisleis Baruch Dira B'Tachtenim. On the other hand, the goal is not to remain a yesh. The goal is to make a Dira B'Tachtenim. And as such, how do you do that? So we have Torah and mitzvahs, but we have bittul, Torah oir. The oir of Elokus is a divine creation, specifically for that purpose, to introduce Gilui Elokus, revealing the divine, revealing the source, and the bittul that is inherent in that. So in the context of Ayin Beis, as an interface between the divine and existence, we're now right smack in the middle of the discussion of bittul, of oir, and how that impacts. And that oir is an interface, the interface between the yesh amiti and yesh hanivra. Both are called yesh. One is the creator, the true yesh. There's the created yesh that feels itself as a yesh, and there's the oir in between, the ayin in between, which divides into two. Right now we're discussing primarily the top one, the ayin of the yesh amiti, that reflects the divine and in a sense channels that to us ultimately through the ayin of the yesh hanivra, which we will learn about shortly. Soon, I don't know, shortly, it'll be in the next few weeks for sure. So that is the context. Now, how is the context in the actual structure of Ayin Beis? This all is coming to explain Das Elyon and Das Tachton, which followed the perspective from above, from the divine, from the source, or from Oyer, as we're now learning, how Oyer sees things, and the perspective from below, which means from the Tachton, from the divine as it manifests in existence, and from the creation as the creation sees it. But we're now talking Das Elyon and Das Tachton, he made it clear, is both in Elokus, Kel Deus Havaya. So both are in Elokus, in Oyer. Now, this followed the whole discussion of man, lechem min hashamayim, lechem min haaretz, two ways to perceive God, through the bread of the earth or the bread from heaven, which was connected to this days of the week, Yemei Achels, weekdays, and Shabbos, which in turn was a discussion of Yom v'yedaita hayom, which is made up of day and night, v'yedaita hayom, Gilui and Helam, and that is basically the concept of Rotzeh and Shuv, as we learned at length, which that in turn followed a discussion on the whole Vayedaita Yem v'Shavesel Levecha, Ki Hashem Elokim b'Shamayim Emal v'Haaretz B'Tachas Ein Oid, which we're actually in the middle of dissecting that verse. We will soon come back to that verse Vayedaita Yem, and then I'll reconnect it all and show the flow. Vayedaita Yem followed the long discussion that came to explain how can a post-Tzimtzum reality experience a pre-Tzimtzum consciousness when Tzimtzum is so vital in the very creation of the yesh of existence? The long discussion of transforming the Tzimtzum. So there was a long discussion about Tzimtzum and Gilui, which is very much connected to what we're learning now. And I'll explain the connection, especially when we come closer to the summation of it all. But it's all about that a concept. We want to have that the existence should have a connection, a relationship with God. They are diametric opposites in every possible way. So all these are steps in the stepping stones of the interface, and that how the yesh can become connected to Elikus, yesh hanivra, yesh amiti. So right now we're in the middle of the discussion that how you actually introduce bittul into existence, and we're talking about earth. And the earth is the three levels, three types and three levels of bittul that we've discussed so far. We're in the middle of the third, and I'll now sum up where we are in this context here. Since I'm already going back in Ayin Beis, I might as well say that the discussion of tzimtzum, how we transform the tzimtzum is all part of the Torah of the Magid, because there he says that not only can Atzilus connect to Elikus, but even Biyah, even after the Parsa, meaning after the tzimtzum, between Atzilus and Biyah, can also connect. And that was the question, how is that possible? That you can connect while remaining an existence, a nivra and a yesh, at the same time connecting. So the answer ultimately is that the tzimtzum itself, which creates the yesh, is really also Elikus, as we learned from Shai Yichud V'Amunah. And therefore, when you transform it, you're transforming something which is the concealment of the power of concealment of the divine, and you're revealing its true purpose, which is also to connect with the revelation. And the Magid's Torah came following the two interpretations in Remim Chelekai HaMelech, saying Ashrei, the two interpretations, whether Yamamshich Keser, which is transcendent energy, essentially like the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, are you mamshich that into Lekai HaMelech, into godliness as the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the godliness that relates to existence? Or is it Mamatel L'mayla Aramim Lekai HaMelech, you're elevating and exalting the tacht and the Lekai HaMelech, Elikus, that's connected to existence, into Keser and beyond. And this is the difference. This is the difference.
Hey, they got naked.
Can
you can't mute him from where you are?
I already did. So this is the difference between tefillah, Torah and tefillah. Torah is Mamayla Lamata, tefillah is Mamata Lamayla. And we will get back to that. I just wanted to put it in context. And if you want to go even earlier, since we do sometimes a review, that was preceded by the long discussion of the difference between Elikaya Melech Koyach, the four different relationships between Etzem and Ispashtus, Yesh Ma'ayin, Gilei Helem, and Koyach and Poel. And the fifth one also, Hiyuli and Gili, and Hiyuli and Poel. So, and that all began at the end of volume 1. We started on Rimim Chelekai HaMelech. After the long discussion of the bittul of Yesh, of Eris and Kalim, Toyu and Tikkun, back to Ma, Shem Ma, the bittul of Shem Ma, which is Milui Alfin, Aleph, Pella. As I said, it goes back to the Eir HaGvul and Eir HaBligvul, Matan Teira, as opposed to the Ovis, Eir Chodosh, elevating existence to a place of Bligvul, and making the Aleph of Chochmah connected to Pella, whether it's first the same letters as Pella or it's the same level as Pella. And all that is all that interface going back to the beginning of Ayin Beis, the difference between Rotzen and the Keiches Makif and Pnimi, Rotzen Keser, and the Keiches Pnimi, which is the immanent energy. So if you think about it in that context, it's really one central theme, the connection between divine and existence. Now the language being used is the ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the ayin of the Yesh Hanivra. Earlier there was Eir HaBligvul and Eir HaGvul. There was the Ovis Matan Teira, Yichud Abba Ve'imach Tatoyin, Yichud Abba Ve'imah Eloyin. There was the discussion about Aleph and Pella. But all of it comes down to the connection of Erimim Chelekai HaMelech, the two ways we connect the divine and existence, from the top down or from the bottom up. We are right now in the long parentheses explaining the Torah of the Magid, which of course is more than a parenthesis, it's so much part of the substance as well. And so then we bring it back to the picture where we are right now. We're discussing the details of bittul, introducing bittul through the three types of bittul in Eir. And what are the three types? One is the bitl of heder tfisa smokim. It exists, but it's nullified in the presence of its source, like a candle in the light of the sun. Level 2, or type level 2, is that even its very existence is affected, because in the first one, the candle remains a candle. It just nullified. Its function is nullified. It's hispashtus. The bitlin is it's an extension. It's in its expression. In level number 2, the earth itself is constantly aware due to its attachment and awareness of the source. Like it is, all three, I should say, are due to the fact that earth is connected and attached and aware of its source. Dovug b'moyer and margishas amoyer, it feels its source. So level 2 is the earth senses that it does not exist without the moyer. And if the source would stop wanting and extending or flowing through the earth would cease to be. But it's still a mitzias. However, its mitzias is completely dependent on its source. And level 3 says it's not even a mitzias that we can talk about. It's not a mitzias that is dependent on its source. Its whole mitzias is atzmus. So the question that the Friedrich Rebbe asked, so then why do you call it a mitzias? On the other hand, bittul means there's something that's bottle. So how do you distinguish it from level 2? On the other hand, how do you distinguish it from atzmus itself? If all it is atzmus, what's the difference between the atzmus that is bottled to and this thing that we're calling a non-mitzias that's being bottled? And we're going to answer that question shortly. To answer that question, the Friedrich Rebbe went into chapter 32, where he asked that question. He then went into discussing that there are 3 levels in Oyer, 3 steps: mitzias, kiyum, and gilui. Its existence, its perpetuation. You could say kiyum is really its sustenance. That it is sustenance, and 3 gilui, that it's revealed. To explain that, he said, let's talk about the 3 levels in Ur as it's encompassed in its source, Ur as it's outside of the source after the tzimtzum, and you already have some form of structure and definition, but it's not yet fully fleshed out, fully defined. And 3, Eris and Kalim. Those are the 3 levels that he concluded now at the end of chapter 32, the bottom of page 163. And he compared that to Mitzias, Kiyum, and Gili are these 3 levels. In the first level, it's just that Oyer is there, but it's completely encompassed in its source, so you call it Esesphiris, it's Hagnuzis. What does Hagnuzis mean? It's Tachlis HaYichud. It's not really, there's no 10 spheres there. They're totally united and encompassed in the source before the Tzimtzum, and they themselves are completely united. And I explained in detail what that is. It's basically the artist envisioning the structure, so to speak. Then comes the Tzimtzum, and the Tzimtzum actually creates that now we have distinct spheres, Chochma, Bina, but it's still called Esses Spheres Blima, without substance, because it's not yet dwelling in a functional way in a Keli. It's just now you can talk about distinct spheres. Each one has their particular personality. And then that's Kiyum of Ur. And the third is Gilui, where it actually becomes a revealed functional sphere, and that's Ur is the Kalim, where Ur is actually fit into the Kalim, and the Kali affects the Ur, that the Ur actually tailored, as he says, is Lafi, Shenas Kafi Muhusa Kalim, Shahu Inyan Hagilui. And the example he gave for it earlier in the chapter was Koyach HaTnua, the power of movement. The truth is, all faculties you can explain these 3 levels, but he used the power of movement as the example. There's the way that the Koyach HaYuli, the Etzem, the Mitzvah, the mere fact that Kol Chai Misnaneya, that every living thing moves, is movable. Then there's the Koyach HaTnua Klali Prati, different types of movement, different parts of the being that moves, the head, the body, and the legs. In that itself are more specifics to the point of writing, drawing, carrying. It's in the guf, in the yadayim. In the head, he used different examples: squinting your eyes, furrowing the brow, moving the lips. And in the legs, he spoke about legs walking, dancing, what else did he say? Jumping and leaping. The point is, this is all a flow. So it begins level 1, Hiyuli is like what he called Er HaKolo, like Eses Firis Agnuzis. That would be Tachlis HaYichud. There it's all part of the Nefesh. Then it begins to manifest in some general way, but it's still a klal. Meaning it's not yet the details. There it looks like it's more like echad, because it brings together after you do the movement and you go back and rest, everything goes back to that koyach klali prati. And then there's the details. The details, when you write an Ayin Beis, that would be like the spheres. The second level would be like Eses Spheres Bli Ma, which means you already have the concept of movement, not just the general potential that a human being can move. The second is the level of you actually have a structure of a head, a body, and a leg and legs. And the third, it actually comes into specific movement. And I explained why I thought he uses movement, because it's a good example for how the Eibishter does his tenuah of creating existence. It's from the lowest faculty. It's not chachma bina, it's not intelligence, but it's still a faculty. And fundamentally, therefore, it's still a ruchni, as he explained. And therefore, you can talk about the echad, just like in the body, he said, the evri haguf, that though there's a difference between the flesh of the brain, the flesh of the heel, but they're still all bodily. They're all physical at the end of the day. Same thing in the evri haneshama, which is like so-called the limbs, the parts of the soul. Even though koyach hatenu and koyach haseichel are very far apart, seichel needs yegia, effort. Tenuah does not, as he explained, but they both go into the category of a koyach ruchni. They're both ruchni koyachs, and therefore the 3 levels that we just discussed. That's where we concluded, end of chapter 32. And now he's going to continue explaining with this. He's going to explain the answer. What does it mean in third level of bittul, that the oir is the mitzias, the oir is only mitzias atzmus, not oir. Even ima atzmus, the only thing that you see is not oir but atzmus. In other words, the oir without atzmus, level 2 recognizes it wouldn't exist, but with atzmus, it's there. There's something that exists. Here he's saying that something is also only reflecting atzmus. So I'm going to explain that now based on what we just learned in this understanding of the Eses Firis Agnuzis, that deepest level of Bitla Oir. Okay, so we continue on. Bottom of page 163, the chapter 33. If you need the text, go to ayinbeis.com, and there you have PDFs of all the texts. So now he's going back to what he said at the bottom of page 161. Remember, he said there's Gimel Madregas Be'eres. And these are the 3 Madregas and Eres which he just spelled out right in the end of the last chapter. Ha'echad, the first level, Hina Eres Kameshen Klulim Bim Keron. The Eres, where they are encompassed in their source. So essentially, they're not yet functioning Eres, meaning doing their job, but they are now in their source, completely absorbed by the source. The Eine Ele Mitzias Bilvad. So here is teaching Mitzias a lot different than we usually hear. When you talk about Mitzias, usually you talk about something exists. Here he's calling Eine Mitzias Bilvad, Eine Ele Mitzias Bilvad. It's only a Mitzias, means the only thing you can say about it is that something is there. But you cannot talk about any definition, because it's all b'tachlis ha'achdus. It's yochid, not echad even. So here he's teaching mitzias as meaning something that's not atzmus, which we'll learn in a moment what that means. But to say that it's a mitzias la'atzmei, that it's like an existing entity like after the tzimtzum, no. The oir is completely absorbed and encompassed within the source. That's the level of mitzias. So Pirush, and he's going to explain. Now, this brings me back to the Rebbe's footnote, where the Rebbe first suggested that maybe it's a mistake when it should have said Mitzias Achaz Bilvad. What I'm not understanding is, since the Rebbe at the end of the order does refer to this beginning of this chapter, that Metzias Bulvad means not many Metzias, and that it means only Metzias. Why the Rebbe felt that it should change to Metzias Achas Bulvad? That still needs explanation. Even though, yes, you could call it that. It's only Metzias Achas, meaning a Yochid, there's no Pratim. But here the Frierdiker Rebbe clearly speaking Metzias as in lack of anything but just the mere fact that it exists. So that needs more iyun. The distinction of how Metzias is used at the end of chapter 32 and how the Rebbe refers to it in the beginning of chapter 33. I have some thoughts on it, but before we go there, let me first continue reading here, and I'll go back to that shortly. Okay. Upirish inya Metzias zuhu, and the meaning of when we say this is Metzias, of the Oyer, the highest level of Oyer, as it's encompassed in its source, hu masha'enei, page 164, masha'enei loya atzmi. And here again, the Rebbe corrects and says it should l'cheda tzarich liyas she'enei atzmi. Because when you say Einei Loya Atzmi, sounds like a double negative. What means Einei Loya Atzmi? But that's how the Rebbe corrects it, and it also needs some delving into, because you could teach, as we're going to teach in a minute, Masha Einei Loya Atzmi. But anyway, let's go with the Rebbe's correction. Masha'enei ha'atzmi. In other words, why we call it a Metzias? Not because it's a Metzias as a self-contained existence. You're calling it Metzias because it's not the Atzmi. It's Oyer. Liyesei kolul ba'etzem. Being that it's encompassed in the Etzem. So as soon as you say something is encompassed in the Etzem, you're saying it's not the Etzem mamish. And every time you say something is encompassed in something, you have to call it a Metzias. Similar to what he said earlier about bittul. Even absolute bittul, if you say something is bottle, you have to say what. You don't say on Atzmus that Atzmus is bottle. Not because Atzmus doesn't have bittul, because Atzmus is not subject to the word bittul. Bittul is referring to something that's sublime, sublimated, nullified, selfless. So he says here too, being it's kol ba'etzem, you call it a Metzias, because it's not the etzem, it's kol ba'etzem. Kol harihu Metzias. Because if it was the etzem, you wouldn't call it kol in the etzem. Then it's part of the etzem. For example, when you say there's sunlight inside the sun, as he explains in Shayachid V'Amunah, you don't say that about the body of the sun. You don't say that the sun is inside the sun. You say the light that will extend from the sun also exists in the sun. So you're right away talking about a Metzias. Its bottle is true. The light is completely dependent on the sun, and the sun is not there. The light will be gone, or even deeper levels of bittul. But you're talking about something that's encompassed in something. So that he calls Metzias. Aval kol Metziyusei. But at the same time, though we called it a Metzias Bulvad, meaning something that's not Atzmus, Hurak Masha'ena Ha'atzmi. That's its entire Metzias is simply that it's not the Atzmi. In other words, it's not a Metzias that you can define as its own. The only thing you could say, it's not the Atzmi. Ukeshem She'ena Ha'atzmi. And just as this oil that's encompassed is not the atzmi, is not the essence, the core, just like it's not the asmi, it's also not an independent entity of another. So here we have something which is very interesting expression. It's not the atzmi, but it's also nothing else. It's not like the personality of Zulase, of anything other than Atzmus. Pirish, this is very interesting words here. Listen to this. Just as the Oyer is not the Mahus Adover, the personality of the core personality in which it's compassed, which is Atzmus, again the Rebbe corrects, kimhus b'fnei atzmei imishu kol. Or the Rebbe says kimhus achar. In other words, basically, let's read the Rebbe says kimhus im mishu kol. Kenira kavana kimhus b'fnei atzmei im. So even though it's not atzmus, it's also not something else. Another suggestion that Rebbe makes that maybe it's a correction, has to be correct. Kemuhus achar im mishu kol. Kemuhus achar. What means im mishu kol? So ena kemuhus adavar shu kol. Yeah. In other words, it's not like you're saying there's another entity. It's kol. So then what is it? Says the Frierdiker Rebbe. Im kein klolos mitziyusei. It's in, and I'm going to explain this, so be patient. Its general existence, humasha ene loiha v'loiha. That it's not this and not this. In other words, it's not atzmus, but it's not anything but atzmus, nothing else. Umakol mokim harihu mitziyus. And nevertheless, we call it a mitziyus. Something exists. So I have a temptation to explain what he's saying here, but I think better to read on, and I'll explain after we finish this section. Because now, of course, I'm sure you're wondering, what does that mean? What do you mean something is not this and not this? So what is it then? If it's not atzmus, and it's not something other than atzmus, so what do we have here? What kind of existence is this? It's an existence we never heard of. If you say oir exists and is bottle, okay. But you're saying it's not even a mitzias of oil that's bottled. You're saying it's not atzmus, it's not anything other. So what is this entity here exactly? So before I give explanation, let's read on and just bear with this. Let's bear it through and see exactly what the Frierdiker Rebbe says. And then we'll come back to explain whatever is necessary to explain. Ubehechrech. And we must say, the bameshahu hinehu yisedi v'ikri. You have to say this entity, this this is not this and not that. Whatever it is, bameshahu, it's something fundamental and primary. Because or else why would it be there? V'hainu, and he explains the ima yese, eine built in mitzias klal. Even though we're not saying it's built in Mitzias Klal, we're not saying it doesn't exist at all. That's why you could say it's kol. You can't say on something that's completely nothing, you don't say kol. You don't say something is encompassed in something else if there's no something. So we can't say that it's built in Mitzias Legamri. You can't say it's non-existent, period. These are the words that Frierdiker Rebbe is using. It's a very abstract and very subtle level, but we'll get to the details. Like similar to what he said earlier. If you say it's bottle, you have to say something is bottle. That was the words he used on page 161. Okay, so even though you can't say it's built in Mitzias Klal, because something has to be called, something is encompassed in the etzem, the ima yesem mitzias, and yet, even though it's a mitzias like we just proved, because you have to say something is encompassed, makol mokem eine adayin esem mitzias, it's still not yet on a level of existence. She yisesa the zulase yisesa le. Existence, as we know it, is that every existence is a stira to another existence, because two existences cannot occupy the same space, the same identity. So if a mitzias is an identity, it would negate another identity from occupying that space. I don't just mean physical space, conceptual as well. Number one is not number two. In that sense, one negates two. I'm one, not two. It doesn't mean they're at war, but it means a mitzias is defined and we learned this earlier about Gashmis and Ruchnis, is defined like he says, Seisel Zalose, it negates another, and the Zalose and the other negates it. So he's saying this Metzias of that's Kolel, even though we called it a Metzias and you can't call it non-existent, yet it's not yet an existence that occupies space in that sense, occupies an identity that would contradict another, or another would contradict it. Very interesting understanding of Bittul, in the full level of Bittul. The third level of Bittul is discussing here. Okay, but let's continue. Aval im zeh, yet together with this, hanoi kfar eiseh metzias. So though we say it's not a metzias that contradicts other forms of existence.
Hinehu.
Oh, I didn't see the verb. Okay, yeah. Avlim zeh hinehu kfar eiseh metzias. But on the other hand, it is some type of existence. Asher b'mashahu hu yesedi v'ikri. There's something to talk about here, that whatever it is something fundamental and primary. So to say it's zilch, a zero, nothing, you cannot say. To say it's an existence that contradicts another, that takes up space, so to speak, and I mean conceptual in some way, also not. So it's a non-existent existence, basically, that is fundamental and primary. Okay. The zehu mitziyuse umuhuse. And this is the mitzias, the existence and the personality of this hakolol, the that's encompassed within the source. Okay. Before we go to level 2, let me explain what this means. How do we understand this? It's very abstract. So I'll give a little explanation that may help. When you talk about atzmus, we know the expression is mitzias built to mitzias nimtza. You can't say atzmus exists. Because when we say the word exist, we mean existence on our terms. This table exists. What does that mean? Table has parameters, has measurement. I see it. I can touch it. It's a whole bunch of empirical ways we experience existence. Metzias built to Metzias Nimtza means does not occupy any type of space or any definition or any description that we can relate to. That's why it's Metzias, because you can't say God doesn't exist, God forbid, but it's a Metzias that is non-existential existence, means he exists not like any form of existence we know. Another way of saying it is, you can't say God exists because our definition of existence is limited. You can't say God doesn't exist, so you say God does not exist. That's another way of putting it. Now, that type of Metzias built to Metzias Nimtza, we can extrapolate, we can try to imagine it a bit based on comparing it to a Metzias. That's called a Metzias Amiti, built to Metzias Nimtza. That led to 2 other descriptions that we learned earlier in Tzadik Dal and Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis, actually, he didn't use the word Mechuyev HaMetzias, but Metziusim Atzmuse. His existence comes from himself. There's no such thing as an existence that comes from itself. Our rule is everything, ein davar eses atzmei, everything has a creator. That's why whenever you see the debates with the atheists, they say everything has a creator. Who created the creator? The answer is, when you understand what creator means, you realize the creator is not an existence like our existence. That's why there's no such thing as who created the creator. Creator, by definition, is a metzias from within itself. We don't have any example for it. The closest we have is the yesh hanivra that feels ein lo ila v'siba, that we are self-made, which is not true. We're not self-made. But our feeling, the Alter Rebbe explains, that feeling comes and gives us a little taste of what atzmus is truly like, even though it's not really comparable, because at the end of the day, we are created. But then there's mechuyev hametzias, means it must exist. Is there anything you know in existence that must exist? Is there a tree, a bird, a stone, a human being that must exist? Nothing must exist. If you suddenly heard that a certain tree disappeared, it fell down, you wouldn't say, oh, wow, all of existence now has been compromised. That's part of existence. Nothing must exist. It exists because God wants it to exist. Atzmus must exist because its form of existence is an emes mitzad its emes. That's why the Rebbe Rashab said once, this used to be held under covers, but lately it's talked about more and more. Well, at least I talk about it. When he said about atheists, when an atheist says God doesn't exist, he said, existed. When an atheist says God doesn't exist, they are somewhat closer to the truth than when we say God exists. Because when we say God exists, we mean existence as we understand existence. And the atheist is actually touching on something real, that I can't relate to a God because I only relate to our type of existence. So God doesn't exist on our terms. Now, they may not mean that, but the statement actually refers to the fact that when someone says, "Well, prove God exists," based on this, there's no possibility to prove God exists because God is not subject to proof. If you could prove God exists, then it's an existence like our existence, where we need proof. The mere fact that you need empirical proof tells you it's not a true existence. That's why you need proof. So it really turns over the whole concept of how we look at God. So now, once you know that, then the question is, so where did this existence come from? If Metzias built in Metzias Nimtza is the only reality, what happened? Well, this is the mystery of Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, that God desired to have a home in Tachtenim. In other words, Tachtenim is a Metzias Nimtza. It's not a built-in Metzias Nimtza. It doesn't say God wanted a dira and built in Metzias Nimtza. He is built in Metzias Nimtza. He wanted something that's a Metzias that is like our Metzias, not like his Metzias. A Metzias that is subject to proof and has to be put there and needs to be sustained and does not have its own true reality. An existence that can convince itself that it's self-contained. And that's where he wanted me Atzmus, my built-in Metzias Atzmus. That's where I wanted to be present. That this Metzias, which is not like my Metzias in any given way, should come to recognize me and even recognize my built-in Metzias Nimtza me. The problem is, as I mentioned, and I say it again now, once you have that, now you have two entities, a Yesh Amiti and a Yesh Nivra. But how is a Metzias Nimtza meant to connect a built-in Metzias Nimtza? We just explained they're complete opposites, not just opposites. There's nothing in common. It's not even saying, we could say, let's say the Metzias of existence is connecting to a higher state of existence. We're not just human beings on earth. We connect to the angels. We connect to Atzilus. We connect to Ak. We connect to the highest levels. So that's a limited Metzias is connecting to higher Metzias, but built the Metzias Nimtza. So God in his infinite wisdom, I can't even say the word wisdom, there's no wisdom yet, but God in his infinite capacity, when I say infinite, I mean not infinite as opposed to finite, meaning beyond infinite and beyond finite, created a thing called Ur. I'm going to create an enigmatic entity that is not Metzias as Metzias Hayesh, that contradicts other existences, like a Yesh does, and it's not me, Metzias, built to Metzias Nimtza. It's a Metzias Nimtza, but it's the highest level of Metzias Nimtza, where Metzias Nimtza touches Metzias built to Metzias Nimtza. Because the Ur is so bottled to its source. So though, yes, it's something, there's a something, but it's a something that's a nothing. Loiha v'loiha. It's a something that's not outside of godliness because it has nothing but atzmus. But it's now I have found what's the word I want? A landing spot where I could meet Metzias of the Yesh, which is Seiser one to the other. So what he's explaining here is that this third level of Oyer is the first step, so-called not outside of Atzmus, but not Atzmus, as the beginning of a creation that will ultimately be a full-blown Metzias of Yesh that feels itself as independent, Tachtenim. But this Metzias is completely bottled to me, and it doesn't even sense itself as an existence, because all it is my built-in Metzias Nimtza manifesting in Metzias Nimtza. So you can't say Metzias Nimtza is Atzmus, because Atzmus is built in Metzias Nimtza. And remember, built in Metzias Nimtza is Bechlal Masayimona. It has everything in it. It's everything and nothing and no definition, so nothing contradicts it. Metzias Nimtza, however, is not a built in Metzias Nimtza. You could say God encompasses everything, but you can't say everything encompasses Atzmus. So Eir is this in-between place. What do you call it when you have like not a placeholder, like a landing spot where you could meet? Like when you say about the Mishkan, the Eibishter says, build a Mishkan, and I will meet you there. It's a meeting place. There's a word in English for it. Whatever, it'll come to me. And that's what Eir is on its highest level. So we have the answer to the question that he asked in the beginning. What's the difference between level 3 and level 2? And what's the difference between Eir in this third level and Atzmus? It's not Atzmus. But at the same time, it's nothing but an expression of Atzmus. And it's the utter ultimate bittul. It's so bottle that there's nothing to talk about except to say that it's not Atzmus, and yet it's only an expression of Atzmus. That's how I would explain. That's what he means. You say Ikri. It's a fundamental and primary force because it's not nothing. We're talking about something that's necessary. Now, does Atzmus need this? No, but we need it. With this, we can come to understand how we can connect, because we have something in between that's not Atzmus, but also nothing but Atzmus, and that becomes that interface that connects us to that deepest level, the highest possible levels. That's how I would explain this.
It's not Mitzius like we are interpreting Mitzius b'derech klal.
So does anybody have any questions or comments? Or you want me to clarify anything further? One of the deepest concepts in Chassidus we're learning right now, and it goes hand in hand, I should mention, with Vayelech Samach Vav, where the Rebbe Rashab there says Chidush Rabbeinu Shmos Eden, the Alter Rebbe's Chidush in Eir. This helps explain Vayelech, which there he says essentially that the Mukabalim were looking for that place where God meets existence. So there's a machlekes between the Ramak and the Rameh, Bepanei, whether Keser is Ein Sof or not. Maybe Keser is the place where they meet. So the Ramak says no, Keser is not Ein Sof because it's Ratzon, it's already a lower level. The Rameh says it's Ein Sof, and that's where we meet. And the Rebbe Rashab, it's based on the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer in Eira Teira in Yonim now, explains that both of them have both opinions have a pro and a con. The pro of the Rameh is that there's something we connect to that's Ein Sof. The con is Ein Sof, however, Ratzon is a level. It can be Atzmus. The pro of Ramak is, he says, that the Ramak is clear that Atzmus is beyond anything we can relate to. But the con is with the part that the Ramak does not explain, so how do we connect? So it says, B'zeh Chidush, the Alter Rebbe comes and Chadash, there's something higher than Ratzon, Keser. What's higher? Oyer. Oyer, he says, is not an entity. Ratzon is an entity. He desires something. Even though it's higher than anything, than Chachma Bina and the spheres, but Ratzon is still an entity. And as he explains there, therefore it cannot be pure Ein Sof. Oyer, because of its bittul, it's essentially a divine field of energy. Its utter bittul does not have any shape and form. In there you can have Ratzon emerge. As we learned earlier, that there's the stage before Ratzon and then how Ratzon evolves from a consideration and so on. So this, I believe this piece here, if you ever learn Vayelech, helps understand Vayelech, and Vayelech helps understand this, because we're talking about this place, which is really ultimately utter and absolute bittul. And in a sense, when you talk about bittul like that level, is bittul exist or not exist? If something is completely bottle, let me ask you, does it exist or does it not exist? On one hand, it doesn't exist, it's bottle. It has nothing of itself. On the other hand, it's not the etzem. So it exists, but it exists in a non-existence type of way. A total bottle. You don't say on atzmus, on biltim mitzias nimtzi, you don't say bittul. You say bittul or kolul means it's completely encompassed in its source. That means there's something encompassed, but that something is a nothing. So really, it's a total, basically personifies and embodies bittul, or like I said, awareness, divine revelation. That's the function and role of Eir. And then there's going to be the lower bittul levels of which we're going to explain now, as begins to relate to us. Because remember, we can't jump to this highest level right away. To get there, we have to go from the bottom up. So we first have to start, I'm a yesh, and some Kabbalah sale and some bittul, there's something more than I am. I'm not everything. And that's not aniva avsied. And we climb. So he's climb until we can reach this level. But this is the highest level. This leads you into atzmus. And the lower levels are really get you from one stage to the other, as we shall learn. Okay, so if anybody has questions, feel free. If not, I will continue.
That means that the amitis, hamitzius, from Welt is...
No, it does not mean, we're not talking about Welt here. We're talking about just for the record. So I would not talk about the world now. He's not talking about the yesh. He's talking about the highest level of the Eifena Gimel and
So if I'm asking you what is Bereshis Bara Lekim, how would you say?
It's not relevant to this discussion. I would answer you, and it's just confuse matters right now. He's not talking about existence now. He's talking about What Bereshis Bara? God created the world. God can do whatever he wants. Existence has no value of its own. I'm not sure what you're asking.
My question is the Metzius that we see, not the way that we see. What is that? Was the question lechatchila? What is the Metzius?
No, so hold on. What? Whose question lechatchila? In the Maimer?
My question.
Your question. Well, I've answered the question so many times, and I'm not sure. And also let's reserve it for another time because it's not in the Maimer here right now. It's a separate discussion.
Robert Jacobson. Oh, go ahead, Yecheskel.
Thank you. Okay, my big question is probably shorter. We seem to be talking about Esespheres Hagenuzas, how they're built in or Atzmi. I think that's what the level we're targeting. We're not talking about how or that's in the state of Nimsa is Bilti Mitzias Nimsa.
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
We seem to. What are we discussing? What are we discussing? How the Esther spheres Genuzas are bottled in their source, and therefore their non-existence, etc. They are the personification of the third level of bittul. How they're found in their source before there's any movement towards an existence. We're not talking about etzem or itself, the or that's called or nimsa. The reflection of bilti mitzias nimsa. We're not talking about how that level is bilti mitzias nimsa. We're talking about the first level of existence, in other words.
Okay, I hear your question. Let me explain.
Okay.
So first of all, this is going to be a lesson of how to learn a Maimer and not how to understand your own ideas or what you learned elsewhere. The Frierdiker Rebbe did not come to explain Esespheres Hagenuzas. The Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to explain what it says in Ayin Beis, where he doesn't even use the word Esespheres Hagenuzas for the record. In Ayin Beis, it's not even mentioned. So if we want to be true to the source and not, as I said, processing, but we want to absorb, in Ayin Beis, he introduced a third level of bittul and oir. I'm just looking to make sure that I'm correct. Maybe I don't think he uses Esespheres Hagenuzas. No. Okay. So in this third level of bittul, which is called Efes Biltecha, he says that there's not even the Mitzias of Eir. Even Ima Atzmus, there's no Mitzias of Eir, only Atzmus. That's the language in Ayin Beis, and the Tzadik Daled repeats that, and then asks some questions about it. As I said, the question number one is, that once you say it's bottle, you have to say there's some Mitzias. So what distinguishes it from level 2? On the other hand, if it's only Atzmus, what distinguishes it from Atzmus? So to explain that, he went into 3 levels of Oir. And 3 levels of Oir, he said, generally speaking, is the level of Eiris HaKlulim, Lifnei Tzimtzum, he called that Esespheres Hagenuzas. And second level, Eir after the Tzimtzum, Bli Ma, and then Eiris Bekelim. Now he's going back to what he began with, the 3 levels in Eiris, where he didn't talk about Esespheres Hagenuzas. He did mention it there. He does mention it at the bottom of page 161. but it's not his primary focus here. But the best proof is he doesn't even mention it here in the beginning of chapter 33, because it's not relevant any longer. He wanted to explain that Lifnei Tzimtzum in general, and this is the key points, 2 key points I want to make here. Once after I gave this introduction, that in general, Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, all of it is called Eir HaKol Ba'atzmusei. I explained this at length earlier when we learned the topic of the Ratzon and all the Ritzenis, the Rebbe's letter in Tafshin Tes, where he asks if Eir Ein Sof Hayaposhet Mamala Kol HaMetzias in the language of Eitz Chaim, how do we talk about levels before the Tzimtzum? And the Rebbe has 2 main answers. One, that it's relative, that compared to after the Tzimtzum, everything before the Tzimtzum is completely poshet, there's no levels. And the second answer that Rebbe gives, deeper answer, is that everything Lifnei Tzimtzum only senses Koyach HaAtzmus within it. So number 1, when we talk about Lifnei Tzimtzum, you could say all Lifnei Tzimtzum is the highest level of Oyer. That's what he says here. Oyer HaKol. If you want to start breaking it down, Lifnei Tzimtzum itself, which he's not doing here, he's clearly not doing it, because he called the second level of bittul of the second level of Oyer la'achrei Tzimtzum. If you want to break it down more subtly, so to speak, Lifnei Tzimtzum, which as I explained many times, needs a lot of explanation, because Lifnei Tzimtzum, there are no levels. So conceptually, in some subtle way, you could say Lifnei Tzimtzum too has these 3 levels. The level like we spoke about, remember, the 3 different interpretations in the Ayin of Yesh Amiti. The first interpretation, it's all Lifnei Tzimtzum. The second interpretation, it's all, in other words, all Lifnei Tzimtzum. The second was Mamala, Seva v'Mamala, and the third was all in Mamala. So if you really want to go deeper in Lifnei Tzimtzum, there's a level that's the Eir HaKolul, the Eir Legalis La'atzmei, Eir Legalis Luzalose, Etzem Eir Nispashtus Eir. But B'chlal, generally speaking, everything Lifnei Tzimtzum is like Etzem Eir for all practical purposes. So therefore, when you speak in that way, then everything is on that level, but he's calling now Tachlis, this not Metzias. And even if you want to talk about Essence Spheres Agnuzis, on this level, it's completely in the Eir HaKolul. You don't even have spheres. It's ultimately going to emerge from there. But we're talking about the highest level possible, then even Essence Spheres Agnuzis on that level is not yet Essence Spheres Agnuzis. It's going to emerge from there, if you want to really break it down in that fashion. That's how I would explain this whole thing. And it's pretty clear that he's speaking on this level, Lifnei Tzimtzum, Achrei Tzimtzum, and so on. So that's the response to your question.
So in other words, we're still not able to say that something is batul in Bilti Metzias Nimsa. To have an idea of what it means true bitul, we're still dealing with something that's Nimsa, whatever level it may be.
As soon as God decided to emanate Oyer Ein Sof, Eir Ein Sof is already Metzias Nimsa, the highest levels. As soon as Eir Ein Sof, some form of divine, whatever you want to call it, expression, the concept, God, I'll go even better. God decided he wants bittul, the concept of bittul. As soon as you say that, it's a Metzias Nimsa, but at the same time, it's loyha v'loyha. It's not a Metzias in any way that contradicts anything else, but it's already not pure, undiluted atzmus, if you wish. That's what he's saying here.
That was very clear from your explanation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shkoyach Yechazkel. Nice question. The Rabbi Jacobson, when we say the famous discussion of Chelik Elokam Mamish, that a Nefesh Elokis, in this discussion of or, the levels of or, where is that Chelik Elokam Mamish located, so to speak? If I could if you can put some type of divine geographic location on it. Chelik Elokam.
Chassidus usually does not discuss it in this context. It's discussed in a different track, so to speak. And I've never seen anyone in any mimer where he equates it with these levels. In other words, does chelik elokam emal mamish? I'll just broaden the question. Has that a built-in Metzias Nimtza connection to Elokah, or is it Metzias Nimtza? It's a very good question. I've never seen anyone address it. Because chelik elika, you could say it's a chelik elika, as alaka manifests in Metzias Nimtza. You could say that. Same thing with Torah. When you say Raisa Yisrael v'Kuchabrichu Kul Echad, the Kul Echad, there's oneness. With what are they uniting exactly? So, but I will say the following: because Oir is completely bottled to Atzmus, point number one. So even if you say Chelik Elikam Mimal and Torah and so on are all in the Metzias Nimtza, but because Metzias Nimtza there is so bottled to the source, in effect, it's one with built-in Metzias Nimtza. It's not on its own. Oir on its own is not built in Metzias Nimtza, but its bittul gives it the right of passage because it's completely bottled, not to itself. That's why it has the ability. That's why we can talk about built in Metzias Nimtza. That's why we can in some way connect with it because it's coming through Metzias Nimtza. Remember, built in Metzias Nimtza, Atzmus is always built in Metzias Nimtza. But that does not mean he can't give us a taste through Metzias Nimtza of a part of himself. So the expression that's used in chelik elikam emal mamish is sometimes chelik kshatefes be'etzem at tefes bekulei from the Baal Shem Tov. What does that mean? So the Rebbe asks in a number of places, especially in Tov Shechai, in the different sichos in Maimonim, the Rebbe says, if you say chelik etzem kshatefes b'miktsase or b'chelkei at tefes bekulei, it's a contradiction of terms. An etzem is not a chelik. But raya, even when you hold a chelik, you hold all of it. So what means chelik? How could you have a chelik of a netzem? And the Rebbe explains that it's a chelik in the world of giluyim. It's a chelik. In other words, from our perspective, you don't see the whole thing. But the truth is, it's part of a higher etzem. So based on that, you can say that Atzmus, built in Metzias Nimtza Atzmus, the full Atzmus, just as he infused himself in the Yesh HaNivra. What does he say in Egeres HaKedesh Siman Chav? So he says, and this is vital, this is where it comes together. I should correct myself. It's not in the Maimorim, in this type of Maimorim, but it does come together in Biyuri HaZeyar and Lekachtem Samach Aleph. There's a few places where, and the Rebbe brings it together. If you want to look it up, in Chukas Tov Shemem Ches, Sefer HaSichos, there's a long footnote that's going to say what I'm going to repeat now. So he says like this, that in Egeres HaKedesh, he says that Atzmus did embed himself in the Yesh HaNivra. Like the Rebbe Rashab once rolled up his sleeve and said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, Zeh, look at this physical body. Atzmus poured out all in order for this physical body. So there's something in the Yesh HaNivra, which with the Yesh says, I exist and I don't have a source. I don't feel I have a source. The Alter Rebbe does not dismiss that as an illusion. He doesn't say that's a delusion and you got to get over it and discover the truth of your Yesh. He says the fact that a Yesh HaNivra is created in that fashion is a major chiddush. Because Oyer is not a chiddush. Oyer reveals its source. If you were a creator, it would make sense that your creations indicate that you exist. You know, every artist signs his name. Every brand builder signs their brand. Here suddenly God created something that doesn't have anything about him in it. That doesn't indicate anywhere that he created it, except using your seichel, you come to such understanding. So the Alter Rebbe concludes from that, that means Atzmus himself, the only thing that can create something that feels it has no source, has to be something that has no source. That's Atzmus. Then the Maimorim says like this, that primary thing, Yesh HaNiti, Yesh HaNivra, is primarily in the Neshamas Yisrael because of the Chelik Elika. So essentially you can say, if you want the geographic location as you asked me for Chelik Elika, and I don't know if the word Chelik Elika Memal Mamish really fits on this, let's say it does. But regardless, that the Sheidish HaGuf is primarily the Sheidish HaGuf of Yisrael, and that is what means Yesh HaNivra, Yesh HaMiti. But then the question is, but Yesh HaNivra we know goes on the whole world, not just on. So the Rebbe explains there, and also Ayin Beis Hazriya talks about it, but there Chelik in Tov Shemem Ches Chukas talks about it at length, that you have to say the Bria also has an element of that, but the Bria is only due to the Koyach HaAtzmus in it. And the Neshama also relates to it. So where it fits is, can we relate to Bilti Mitzias Nimtza? And the answer is that the gufi of the bodies of Yisrael can relate to the etzeminion of Atzmus, whereas existence has Atzmus within it, but it's due to the power of Atzmus, not necessarily that we relate to it. That's the key distinction when we're talking in this context, your question. But check it out in Chukas Mem Ches. It's a very long ha'ara, it's a very deep ha'ara there, very interesting stuff in this context. But generally in the Maimonim themselves, like whether it's Ayin Beis or here in Sadik Dalet or Vayelech, they don't bring the two together. There's another point to be made that some will argue that when you say the Rebbe said that the Rebbe is an Atzmus Angeton Naguf, Gashmi, Atzmus Umuhus, Atzmus Ein Sof Angeton Naguf Gashmi, some think that maybe that's like the level of Oyer. Because Oyer is bottled completely, Oyer can is bottled then. So basically, a Rebbe is essentially manifesting Atzmus because of his total bittul, which of course is correct. The Rebbe brings footnotes there, Man Pnei Odin, Avaya Dor Ashbi, different expressions. It says also on Yaakov Avinu, Vayikra Kela Lekei Yisrael, that Yaakov is called by the name of God. So the point is due to their bittul. That's why you can't just say it on anybody. But some point out that l'cheda it's higher than Oyer, because if you're talking about an atzmi, like a Rebbe, or you're talking about in a broader sense the gufim of Neshamas Yisrael, you have to say that maybe there's more than Oyer itself. There's something also more atzmi about it. But this is a longer discussion, which I'd rather not go into right here, because here he's definitely talking about Oyer, and it's pretty high as it is. But it could be that when you say, for example, in Maimonim, it says, Neshama is a lakus shenasa nivra. There's an expression. And Shama is a lakus shenasa nivra. Godliness that became a creation. You don't say that on Malachim. They didn't become a nivra. It's a big kiddush. A lakus became a nivra. A lakus is usually a lakus. But there, it's not atzmus. There, lakus is more a divine entity became a physical entity, a creation. So it's a longer discussion that needs more, because when you say Oyer, remember Oyer works through us. Teira Oyer. A neshama is compared to Oyer. Ner Hashem nishmas Adam. But there's something about a neshama and Teira when they come to this world that they capture the power of Asmus to transform the world. So they definitely use Oyer, but it looks like they also have a koyach atzmi in them that's more than just Oyer. Oyer is necessary for the bittul part, that it should be complete devotion to Lakus. But you need something more than Oyer. You need the Keli, and Oyer and Keli and the koyach of the neshama and the guf. That's Musha Shanatzmus, the Yesh and Oyer. Remember we discussed about those two together really bring the power of Atzmus in a revealed way. So Oyer is more the bittul part of it, and the neshama beguf, the Yesh, is more the Atzmus part of it. The Bilti Mitzias Nimtza that is reflected in this physical world. That's how I would put it and phrase it. As we learned earlier, Ein Arech Lecha, Dafka, in this world you feel the Ein Arech, the infinite distance, God's, the Atzmus of Atzmus, and through Oyer you feel the Gilui or the Bittul, that there is an Atzmus. The Yesh doesn't feel Atzmus. So when you have Oyer and it reveals the Koyach Atzmus, in existence, if it's Mitzias Nimtza that reveals Atzmus, then you get all of Atzmus, or not all of it, the real Atzmus, the nature of Atzmus, Yesh, that comes through the Yesh. But you need both, because the Yesh doesn't have Gilui, and the Oyer doesn't have Yesh, doesn't have Atzmus.
So did I hear you just say that an Nefesh Elokis is built in Mitzias Nimtza, or you didn't say that?
I didn't say such a thing. No, I would never say. There's only one built in Mitzias Nimtza, it's Atzmus. Whether he gave a taste of it, yes, in the Yesh, he embedded an experience of it. There's no two gods, remember that, never.
What do you mean by Yesh here? In the Yesh, that's the Neshama?
I told you, go look at Chukas Tovshim Em Ches, and he explains Yesh is referring to the Yesh of the Gufim of Neshamas Yisrael, or he's talking about the Yesh of the whole creation.
What do you mean? What's Yesh of Gufim?
A guf, the guf of a human body, the guf Yisrael. With Alter Rebbe says, Avonu v'charta, the guf Yisrael, the physical manifestation where neshama enters in this physical world. The guf is a yesh.
Right. Okay, you said goof in the shamas. I wasn't sure. Fine.
The guf of the neshama.
Reb Simon, could you answer me? Since Hashem is a Mitzias built in Mitzias Nimtzo, there is a place for another entity, and if not,
Of course
how
not.
could you-
Ein eid milvade. What do you mean? There's no
Oh,
place for
so-
the other entity.
So in practical world, how could we explain the yesh of us? I know oil.
You keep going back to this question. I don't understand. God can create anything he wants to create.
It is
He
very
created a world. This is God's power to
it's
create.
a
existence.
fundamental thing that it's impossible to understand. If we're saying that there is a place for another, for a Metzius of yesh, this is
I'm
the
not- one second.
contradiction.
Are we talking about Ur or Yesh now? What are you talking
No,
about?
I'm talking about yesh now.
Well,
Not
why don't you ask me the question about Ur, which is the Teichen that we're learning? How could God create Ur that's a Metzias Nimtza when he's a built-in Metzias Nimtza? Let's talk about Ur, because that's the Teichen. Explain that to me. You understand that?
I have a problem with that also, but the Rebbe,
Okay.
the Rebbe is explaining it here that it's not a Metzias Amitis, it's not a Zelazulosoi, it's a creation. I'm not understanding it 100%, but he's calling it Metzias. But yesh, what is yesh?
Yesh is Koyach Eliki, im ilu nitner reshus lires, we only see Elikus. That's what he says in Shari Yichud V'Amunah. Why do we have to go away from that? Do you understand Shari Yichud V'Amunah or not? What you're asking me is Pshat in Shari Yichud V'Amunah. In Shari Yichud V'Amunah, the Alter Rebbe says that the Kol Mitzias HaNivraim, we learned it at length there. You have to get out any of your preconceived notions. We learned at length that the whole existence is created by Asara Ma'amoris, Dvar Hashem, Le'elam Hashem, Dvar Chanitzu B'Shamayim. Ilu Hoya, Asius, Elu Mistalkis, Lerega. It would be Chazer to the way it was, Mamash Kaidim Seishis Shemei Bereshis. In Peta Gimel, he continues and says, and we learned this inside at length.
But Bitul
One second, don't ask me but. You
Amen.
ask me. One second, you're giving me a but in the middle of my answer. I don't understand. You've asked this question, Rab Shlomo, many times. You're cutting me off from answering. So how are you ever going to get an answer? I don't understand. You're asking me a question. I'm middle of answering, and you're telling me but. Let me finish my answer. Think through the answer, then ask me a question. I mean, let me say it through. Comes in Peta Gimel, and he says, therefore, Kol Mitzias HaNivroim is really Elikus. And Ilu Nitna Reshus La'ayin Liris. If God did not close our eyes or did not block us seeing it, all of existence would be only Elikus. And therefore, there's also the Koyach HaHelam is also a Koyach Eliki. So in truth, all of existence is Elikus. Either Elikus is Gilui or Elikus is Helam, or combination of both. Now, you're entitled to ask questions on Shari Yichud V'Amunah, but define the question on the mimer that you're learning. If you're asking, what does it mean in Shari Yichud V'Amunah, we'll discuss it. I don't want to discuss it here. I could discuss it with define. You can't just ask a question. The question is on, Alter Rebbe himself says this in Shari Yichud V'Amunah. You could say, I don't understand. So we'll make time, you and I, and we could talk about it on the phone or whenever. So where's your question? On Shari Yichud V'Amunah? On something else? We're learning something. We have to know, what are we asking about? This is not my, you're not asking me my pshat. This is befedish in Shari Yichud V'Amunah, this teichen, where he talks about Bitl HaNivroim, which we learned, by the way, here. We learned about it. We learned it befedish here, remember? As a matter of fact, he explained the third level of Oyer with his Bitl. That the third level of Oyer, that it's because it's all Koyach Atzmos. Except in the Nivroim, he said it's Bitl HaNivroim. And in Oyer, it's Megala Atzmos. It's only the Gili of Atzmos. Remember the diuk of the Alter Rebbe and Shari Yichud V'Amunah, the two stages. One was the first thing that the Nevroim. Remember what he said before. There's two pshat, the two levels in Shari Yichud V'Amunah. Just reminding myself. That goes back. I just want to refer you where it was on page. Where was the Shayach V'Amunah? I'm sorry, on page 160. Earlier in this Maimon. So he said the first part of Shayach V'Amunah is and the second, Haruchnis Hashefei Alav, the Koyach HaBeira in it, is Hulavade, he said, that is Biladei, F is Biladei Be'emes. So if you want Pshat in that bottom of page 160, I explained it at length, but I like to focus where exactly we're discussing what, because right now the question is not about, we're not talking about Nivroim here. We're talking about Oir. But he does equate Nivroim with Oir, so that is some connection as well. So what would you like to do now?
Okay, you said that this is a different discussion.
No, you have to ask. I need you to establish, is your question on a word in Shayach V'Amunah? What are you asking about? I don't want to talk in abstract. Tell me which sefer, which line, and which page you're asking about. Something that's what's the most important of all. Let's start with that. Because then we're learning inside. We see what the Alter Rebbe says, or the Rebbe Rashab says, or the Frierdiker Rebbe. You can ask a question, and then we'll find an answer. So I would suggest the first thing is find what you're asking on. Look to Shayach V'Amunah and see, is there an issue that you don't understand? And I'm happy to address it. But I want to begin with a grounding. Like we learn something, then you ask a question. You're asking a question just in general. What means Breishis bara Lekim? On what are you asking that question? Who says it doesn't say Breishis bara Lekim? No one ever said it doesn't say that. So you have to find where your question is. Is it a Shayach V'Amunah? I'm just wondering.
Yes, and I felt that I could say happy when I see this explanation here about oil, even though that this is also not 100% clear, but that makes it much more clear.
So your question is,
But
to be
Shayach
specific, you're asking a
V'Amunah.
question on Pei Gimel of Shayach V'Amunah?
Yes. And
Okay,
we know
so-
that the Rebbe Maharash said that the world is a Metzius.
No, I'm asking, where's your question on?
Yeah.
On what words?
Shayach
Shayach V'Amunah?
Yeah.
Okay. You think the Rebbe Marash doesn't know what it says, Shayach V'Amunah?
Of course you know. I don't know.
Did you look in the Maimon Mika Moicha that you're quoting?
I spent a little time this Shabbos about it, and I saw that this is a big chiddush that the Rebbe Maharash made, among other chiddushim, Rishimul and Nogabat Tzimtzum, b'cholei, that the world is a Metzius.
That's
And
not the
I do
chiddush
that always, but I don't
of the
understand.
Rebbe Marash. This is a chiddush from the Pasuk in Chumash, Breishis Aleph Aleph, that there's a world is a Metzius. It says Breishis Bar Elokim. But anyway, I would suggest, you have a question about the Rebbe Marash and the Shayach V'Amunah. It's a good question. It's not the context what we're learning now for sure. Secondly, if you go back to the bottom of page 160, I actually did explain it and answer the question, just for the record. But if you need further, let's talk about it outside of this class right now, because it's not what we're discussing here, for sure not. And it's just confusing matters. This is complicated enough. And now, so this discussion really is like going to another sugya. Okay.
Thank you very much. All the, tangential, it's was very kind of you to do it. It means a lot. Thank you.
Do you all understand this difference between Oir and Nivra? Or everybody thinks it's all the same thing, the same pot? It's very, very different. Do you understand?
It sounds like the difference is how it sees itself. It never sees itself as something totally different, separate, and or sees itself being totally batul. That seems to be the Iker thing we've emphasized.
Yeah, but there's another point I keep making, which is, I think, vital that you need to keep understanding. In a strange way, Yesh, on one hand, at the end, once you have Oir, will reveal about...
What? Hold on 1 second.
keeps on moving themselves. Okay. On one hand, Yesh, once you reveal the fact, it has an element of revealing for us Mitzius Matzmuse and built in Mitzius Nimtze. But the interesting twist,
We couldn't see you for a minute.
Excuse me?
We couldn't see you for a minute. Now you're back. Okay.
So on one hand, the Yesh, at the end of the day, L'asad Lava, you can say, once will be effective and will be combined with the Yesh, we'll have the revelation that the Yesh reveals to us something about Atzmus. Mitzius Matzmuse, built in Mitzius Nimtze. As we discussed, Tovshin Zayin, Pesach Maimon talks about that more at length. But on the other hand, interestingly, the Yesh, it's totally due to the fact that it's the Koyach Atzmus. It's not because the Yesh itself reveals Atzmus. Atzmus embedded in a Yesh, the concept of the feeling of Ein Le'ila V'Siba. But it's not because the Yesh declares Atzmus. Once you have which does declare, then the Yesh teaches us something that does not know on its own. On the other hand, interestingly, does not reveal the nature of Atzmus, of built Mitzius Matzmuse, built Mitzius Nimtze. Koloi zeh kol ha'atzmus shenimtze memena It's not all of Atzmus. Is just a reflection. But on the other hand, bittul is far more internal because that's all it does, declare godliness. So the bittul is mitzad itself. The bittul is not mitzad yesh itself, the bittul is mitzad On the other hand, the yesh reveals the koyach habayra. That's why he said, from the Shai Yichud V'Amunah, he said you have to say that in truth, when you know the truth, the Nevraim are really bottled b'mitzias mamish. They're bottled b'mitzias mamish because they have nothing of their own. And even the fact that they feel that they're yesh does not declare Atzmus. It reveals that Atzmus put it there. Oyer, on the other hand, he says, Oyer is a revealer. Its whole mitzias is revealing. And what does it reveal? Atzmus in the highest level, it reveals Atzmus, including everything about Atzmus. Though itself, it's not the identity of Atzmus because it's mitzias nimtze, but it's a revealer and it's bittul. So in an interesting way, you could say a certain level of bittul that has that the yesh never has. Obviously, the goal is combining the two. I think this is a vital component to understand. So for example, with you don't have to come and say, you should know you're really bottled talakus. Knows that all the time. It's the yesh hanivra that needs to be nullified, so to speak. Don't think you're a whole mitzias. Your whole mitzias is only due to talakus. That's the Shai Yichud V'Amunah. You're not going to find anywhere a mimer that has to come and teach the to be bottled. Is created for bittul. It doesn't have another option even. Its whole muhus is that. That's why taka the tachlis is not What's the chiddush? You create something that's bottle. There's no chiddush that it should be bottle. The chiddush is the yesh becomes bottle. So the point I'm making here is that the yesh has a koyach atzmos in it, but bittul is something that has to work on. The does not have the koyach atzmos, meaning the built mitzias aspect. But on the other hand, it has the bittul very much intact. And I think that's a critical component in understanding the difference between the two. And yet, he does equate the two because at the end, you want to teach the yesh bittul, and they want the yesh to teach what atzmus is like, so to speak.
Rabbi Jacobson, I think if I heard you correctly, you just said that the highest levels of reveal totally atzmus. And if that's what I thought you said, if that's true, that this highest level of
I did not say that, by the way. But
no?
Okay.
I thought you said that. So, but it doesn't, right?
I said they reveal nothing but atzmus. But they don't reveal, without the yesh, you will not know from that atzmus is built in mitzias nimtza or that atzmus is mitzias atzmuse. That's what I said.
So even this highest level of Or, the first level, the highest level is not. It's not the same as Atzmus. It's not going to reveal all of Atzmus, no matter what. Even it's Tachlis a Bittel. It's not a gateway for all of Atzmus, is it? I mean, all of Atzmus is revealed there?
Not on its own, but because of its bittul, it would be like a simple person who's a total devoted servant to a king. So even though he himself does not reflect close to what the king is like, but because of his bittul, he could carry all of the king's elements, including the elements that are only reserved for the king. So there is that element of bittul, but it's not because he relates to that aspect. The yesh, on the other hand, relates to the atzmus. So bottom line, if there was only oir and there was no yesh, the oir would not necessarily, maybe through its bittul, it would come to recognize bilta mitzias nimtza, but you wouldn't know. We wouldn't know bilta mitzias nimtza really. So it's a combination of both. The oir on its own is not a manifestation of bilta mitzias nimtza, but because of its bittul, it can reflect it. And especially once this yesh is created, then the yesh teaches us, and the oir also recognizes through the yesh this concept of bilta mitzias nimtza. It's like I said, a messenger of the king may be very simple, and he may not even understand something, and then the king sends him on a mission, and he brings a message to a big Talmud Chacham, and the Talmud Chacham says, now I understand. So the simple person also appreciates it because he carried it there, even though he wouldn't have known it on his own, but he needed the Talmud Chacham to tell it to him. Something like that. There's a number of sikhs from the Rebbe. There's a sikh Vayakel in Chelik Tazayin, beautiful sikh about Torah mitzvahs, where is the kavana Torah oir or mitzvahs yesh agashmi, and he speaks how Torah carries oir into the mitzvahs, and how mitzvahs is megala something in Torah, and they both need each other. It's a language that's more easier to understand these ideas. But at the end of the day, even the koyach hayesh, koyach hamalchus, to create yesh ma'ayin, and yesh hanivra, that's ein la'ila v'siba, that too, remember, it's the oir that carries the power of creation. If you're looking to get a Sakeda, she doesn't just say Atzmus creates the yesh, he does it through oir. So oir is the carrier of the koyach Atzmus because of its bittul. But oir itself, take away the yesh, would only, its identity is gilui and bittul, not bilta mitzias nimsa. That's not its identity, but it can carry it because it's bittul. It's a carrier and a revealer, yeah.
So to speak, the concept of bilta mitzias nimsa, we're able to get that through Or and put that together with the yesh of the nifra, and come up with the conclusion of what we're trying to, what we are.
Well, Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu is Lios Leis Baruch Dira, not Ba'oyer, but B'tachtenim.
Right.
The Tachtenim are the central focus here. Oyer is a step to get there and to create the Dira. So at the end of the day, it's in the Tachtenim where the Koyach HaAtzmus will be most apparent. Though the Oyer is a revealer, but it reveals what Atzmus wants, which is Tachtenim, the Yesh. So it's a combination of both, absolutely. I've explained it many times. Without bittul, without gili, without awareness, the yesh can be the highest level, but it will not achieve anything. It requires avodah, and it requires bittul, and it requires all the avodah. You can't just say, I'm a yesh hanivra, and therefore I'm connected to Atzmus. That's all we need. No, you need to have the oir and all the shteder shtalshlus.
Yes.
That's the reason we have all these levels. Yeah.
It's the Or that goes through all the Seder Stalshus that comes down to be something that's understood.
The Oir creates Seder Shtalshlus. The Oir creates the Yesh too. It's all done through the Oir. The Oir is the carrier of everything.
Okay. Nevertheless, concept comes through having Or that fits the mind. So we can understand.
I'm not sure what that means, what you're saying now. What mind? Which mind are we talking about here?
Okay. My mind, actually. In other words, Or comes down, goes through levels where it's built in, where it has no. I think I'll just skip skip this. Good. Let's go on. Fine. Not going to get into it. Good.
Okay.
So
let's stop here. I'll stop here close to the top of page 164. Explain the first level. And I can tell you again and again, this is subject matter that takes hours and hours to really think through. I would say even hundreds of hours. And I encourage you to learn it again and again. You can listen to the recordings. But I see that we go back to the same points because I think what's lacking, frankly, is if I was a true disciplinarian and a true educator, I would make a demand of you to write a paper on this topic and deliver it and explain it. Because I feel, and tell me if I'm wrong, I feel that I'm explaining it. I don't know if you have internalized it yet in a way that you can explain it. And as a result, we keep coming back to certain points that are questions. So I would recommend for yourself, at least, write down how you understand this in the best of your ability. Because what you're doing is you're listening to me, I'm explaining, and then asking questions, which I often feel are the same questions again and again, which is fine, but it tells me you haven't yet internalized it. So internalize it, see what's clear, what's not clear, and it's a process like all learning. This is not come quickly. This is very complex and profound. It's not few mathematical equations where you put together yesh, shtalshlus, here, a thing here, there, and you got yourself a story. You have to really feel what bittul is, what is. You have to explain. It's not just a mechanical thing. Is not a screwdriver. Is elikus. It's eliki. It's godliness. So what's the difference in etzem and when you say the Beis Hamikdash, a place where there was v'shachanti b'seichem, is that or is that atzmus? Did you think about that? Does atzmus need a structure? Is it for us? Is it for the Eibishter? So don't answer. My point is try to personalize it. So when we say something is godly, what does that mean? Something is elokus. The Alter Rebbe trembled when he just said the word atzilus. Didn't even talk about lifnei atzimtzum and atzmus. So what does all this mean? And where does yesh come into play? And how do they interact with each other? I think if you had to explain this to someone else, not to me, to someone else that does not know what this idea is, I think it'll make you have to work harder in internalizing it. And then, I'm not saying everything will be clear, but that's the process. I think we're coming to that point because this is, it's not mechanics. I can tell you that right now. You're not going to figure it out with mechanics. It's going to be through avodah and understanding its application. Where does play itself? That's why I suggested, I don't know if any of you are even going to look there, but if you look in Vayakel, Chelek Tazayin, and I'm not going to tell you what it says there. You do the homework. You'll begin to start seeing this theme, and it emerges in many different places. So that's what I think is needed, a little more internalizing. And I'm not saying this to be critical. I'm just sensing it's work. This is real work. Understanding these principles. You say there's the principles of Chassidus, Eir, Atzmus, Eir, and all these levels. And it is, we're learning the deepest stuff of Chassidus. That's why a lot of people stay away from this. Because even Mashpiyim, people have asked me, why are you teaching this? I said, let everybody get a taste of the highest level and let them then struggle with it. This is not learned early in yeshiva. This is like from the advanced of the advanced. When we were in yeshiva, never Tzadik Daled was off limits. Not off limits, you can learn it, but it was considered to be beyond most people. And Ayin Beis is the same thing, and Samach Vav for that matter as well. But that's fine. I have confidence that all of you are smart and you have Chassidish feelings. And I think with work, you get there, but it takes work. I can tell you that right now. It takes work. This is, I can't tell you how many, hundreds, I don't know, maybe I would say even thousands of hours of understanding, because the whole picture of how God put everything into motion and everything has its role. I gave a good example, I believe, with Keirach and the Meraglim. Meraglim wanting Keirach wanting the Yesh, and how both of them were off. You need both. So there's plenty of examples to make it more palpable and palatable. I was confused. They're both correct. So I hope that my words from the heart enter the heart, and it'll help. We'll continue, obviously. I'll try to explain as best of my ability, but I feel sometimes frustrated a little with that because I see we go around in circles. And again, it doesn't bother me per se, but I want you to grow through it, and you should understand it better. So I hope some of this helped, and we'll continue the journey.
Rabbi Jacobson, I don't want to ask, it's not a chutzpah question at all. It's just a question of clarification. Do you feel at this point in your learning as our teacher that it's all come together for you at a new level? It's come together?
Yeah, because the more I have to explain and the more I have to bring it down in more examples, of course, it's sharper. I wouldn't say it's coming together for the first time. I would say the ideas that have come together to some extent, I think there's certain things I've come to appreciate more and more. Like even while we're learning, like right now, I understood today a deeper understanding of what we learned on top of page 161, difference between Nivra and Yesh. Because when you have to talk it through, of course, it always comes clear. Even now, even this discussion now about Oyer, the three levels and so on, I still have my own internal questions, like exactly how the Oyer and Yesh interact with each other, because there's no question in my mind that the Oyer, because of its bittul, it can channel things that are beyond itself. That's the whole purpose of bittul. You know, if you don't have bittul, you can only do as much as you can do. If you're bottled to something, to the Rebbe, to a shlichus, to a cause, you can achieve more than you because you're become bottled. You become an extension. How could you be eternal when you're bottled to eternity? You become an extension. What does the Alter Rebbe say in Tanya? Kol inyan hagdusha hu bittul. That's what makes something kedusha. It's a dover bottle. Yeah, the yesh and klippa is the opposite of bittul. So that so there's no question that Oyer has that element. And a second thing, on the other hand, there's something the yesh contributes that Oyer does not have. So this goes back to what Torah, there's in Torah, for example, tzaddikim and Baalei Tshuva is a similar, tzaddikim is like Oyer, Baalei Tshuva is like yesh. You know, Torah mitzvahs, Torah and Tshuva, and so on and so forth. So yes, the answer is yes, and I'm happy to say that. I by no means have come to the destination. I am very enriched by this discussion and so on. I just want, I'm also saying it for yourselves, not because I'm frustrated that I have to repeat myself. I don't have a problem repeating myself. I just want you to grow, want you to be able to, you know, but it takes effort. You guide to Metzasi. There's no way around it. You know, I give Mar Mekemas all the time. It's not like I don't mention sources. I Vayelech and stuff, other stuff. But look, at this end of the day, this is not a school where you're being marked and you're getting a degree or graduating or not graduating. At the end of the day, it's Berotz and Atev. You're all adults, and so and you know, it's just not my style even to be demanding. But if you really wanted that to really grow, yes, if you were able to explain this idea to a secular group of people without using one word Oyer and Yesh, that would be very interesting. And the same thing with other ideas we're learning here. But that's ultimately how you learn Chassidus and you internalize it. I could explain this if you wish, and maybe next time, next class, in complete English without using any of these words. You know, because that's what I do well, and I've done that. That's where
I
I
would
learn
love
the most.
that. Personally, I would love that. I'd love to hear you try to do that if you could do it. That would be amazing.
That's a key. That's a key. It's a challenge. I have done it, but you know, now look, learning this inside the way we're learning the Iyun, every line we're pouring over, we're not rushing, is for sure. It's very geschmack and very fascinating, and very, very profound. There's a lot of things that need more explanation. I don't even go into all the questions I have because I want to keep a flow going here. But when you go deeper into it, it becomes quite fascinating. I mean, this stuff is this language. Loi ha v'loi ha. You're not going to see it often in Chassidus. Very rare. Where he talks about an existence that exists and doesn't exist at the same time. You know, it's quite fascinating, such language. But it makes total sense when you think of it in the context of Avodah. You know, how existence is ultimately going to become connected to God and not lose our identity, which of course is the biggest challenge in the whole process.
Could we refer to this as quantum Chassidus?
I was thinking, I think that, frankly, honestly, you're insulting Chassidus if you call it quantum, because quantum is far, far lower levels. Quantum to me is more like the Elam HaYetzira, which is Elam HaBriya, Efsharius HaYesh. This is beyond quantum. This is, we're built to Metzias Nimtza meets Metzias Nimtza. Quantum is already a reality in existence, that God created a reality. You could say quantum gives us a little taste of the indeterministic and the probable and states of probability. That, yes. I think I shared with you the first Hanoch I ever wrote, official Hanoch, Shabbos Pasha Miketz Tov Shemem. So the Rebbe granted me a great gift. He spoke one of the deepest Farbrengens that ever existed. And he spoke about this idea of quantum, actually. He didn't say quantum, but he spoke about chalemus and about efsharius, possibilities, and then actualizing. I'll share with you another time. But the Rebbe wrote a whole footnote there, referring to Samach Vav, and explaining how from potential scenario, from probability becomes a defined state. Very, very connected to not necessarily these words here, but there's some similarities.
That's like more like the Heisenberg principle.
Of uncertainty. Well, that's connected to quantum, yeah. Yeah, quantum is in my opinion, child's play compared to this, to be honest. Because quantum is not built in Metzias Nimtza. Quantum is a state of probability, a state that is not yet determined or defined, but it could become defined. So it's a state that's still there, but God is not quantum. God is beyond quantum. Quantum itself is one of God's creations, as is defined physics. Yeah, Newtonian physics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, my friends. The ride continues.
These concepts of existing and non-existing, etc. They were, for years we learned them in the schools of philosophy. So these ideas are not new.
No, I understand, but built in Metzias Nimtza, yes, there is some similarities in other schools of thought, but especially our Chassidus teaches it. It's quite. Remember, utter bittul is something that is not easy for human beings to swallow. Because like one person once told me, even bittul has to have some geschmack. That's what he told me. So I said, you mean even bittul has to have some little yesh, some yesh there? I understand. It's the concept of recognizing that you don't exist and all you are is a creation of the divine, and it's not about you becoming greater, is not easy for a yesh to embrace. So many people learn about bittul and then they feel even more yesh because now I understand bittul too.
That's a step in the right direction.
I agree. That's what Mittler Rebbe said. That Sibla zol von der Wern, aber Chassid is aus der Chazen. Even if you become like an onion, like a okay, my friends, I see this is turning into a marathon Farbrengen, which is beautiful.
1 second. You mentioned Chelek Design. You mentioned Chelek Design Vayakel. Which Vayakel?
On the Simon Besechte Chegige.
I'm holding it in my head and I can't find it.
Maybe Chof Aleph? Maybe Chelek Chof Aleph. Then maybe my mistake.
I don't see it in design.
Hold on a second. Let me just see. 1 second. So let's stop here, top of page.